Welcome to the Music for the Soul podcast, where we talk honestly about difficult things. This is a place where music, hope, and healing come together. I'm Becky Nordquist.
And I'm Steve Seiler. Boy, do we have a treat for you folks today.
Indeed.
Joining us today is, I feel like the only way to describe him is to say the legendary Bob Farrell. So there you go. I've set the bar high, Bob.
Sometimes I feel legendary just because I can't get up in the morning easy, but it has covered a long time. I'll put it that way. It's been 40 plus years of doing.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's go back a ways. Some of our listeners will know some of this history the minute I mention it. Others of them will go, what? So I'm eager for some to reminisce and for some to get caught up. As Farrell and Farrell, you and your wife Jane were part of the Jesus movement. For people who don't know what the Jesus movement was, particularly the role music played in it, can you give us a little bit of history?
Absolutely. I always tell people the Jesus movement was really Jesus moving. And that's what happened to Jane and I in Houston, Texas. But simultaneously, it was going on in Orange County, in Costa Mesa, Southern California. It started popping up all over the country. It came to Houston, it came to Asbury College, it came to Freeville, New York, to, Phil Kagan, all that crew that were up there, Petra and the people that were in Honeytree, that were in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And the thing that was driving the Jesus movement wasn't preachers and it wasn't churches. It was just people, and especially musicians. And that's what touched me, because I was raised in West Texas. I moved to Dallas in the 60s. So I started playing in bands, playing not folk music, card songs and beach songs and, Beach Boys and all that doings. And then the Beatles came. And because I was in Dallas, all the British invasion bands that came to America came to Dallas. So I got to see the Kings. I saw the Beatles. I saw all these Stones. I saw all these people in their infancy in Dallas. And so I got hooked big time on that music. I had my own band in high school and early college, and cover band, but in West Texas, back in Lubbock by that time. And I did really well. I was really popular. And I got married, and Jane and I moved to Houston. I got out of my band. So that was the precursor to coming to the Lord, was that I hadn't been playing music for a couple of years, and I was going to college and working full time and going to night school, and Jane was working, and pretty soon we had a baby and all that. And essentially what was happening to us was the marriage was crumbling. We weren't doing well, and we were about to bail. And one January of 1971, Jane came in the house and said, Bobby, I'm going to live. She'd been to a service that morning at First Baptist Church, Houston. And she said, I'm going to live for Jesus. I said, Jane, I'm going to live in Dallas. and as it worked out, there was a friend of mine home from Vietnam that was visiting us at that time. And when he went and got in his car to leave that day, I went with. So I went to Dallas for 2 months and lived like a reprobate and libertine. And you know what? I got sick of it. After a couple of months, I was like, I got to go home and try to make this work somehow. Yes. I don't want anything to do with Jesus, but please do something here with this marriage. And so I went home, and within a week, she let me back in the door, and she had been praying, Lord, send me a Christian husband. and she, forget about that guy that left me. And then she started praying, just touching wherever he is, Lord, and then bring him home. And then she finally started praying, just bring him home. And so I got home, and within a week, I was ready to split again. I was just like, all of a sudden, Jane had all these new Christian friends in and out of her life. So I didn't know I didn't have any upbringing in Christianity. I had none. And so I didn't know the Bible from flip. And it was interesting because that was 1971. So we're at March of 71 now. But in fall of 1970, in University of Houston campus, I was walking across the campus one day, and I came around the corner, and there was a band set up on the Union building, and it was a love song. And I stopped and of course, I'm a musician, so I listened to 4 or 5 songs, and I went, golly, that's cool. There wasn't anything like that. There wasn't any Christian rock.
Mhm.
There wasn't any Christian music beyond, it was always just hymns and Southern gospel and stuff
Sure.
like that. There wasn't anything contemporary and hip. And I thought, that's pretty cool, isn't it? So the next day, I go to the Baptist Student Union because they have free lunch on Wednesdays. And I went, and who set up playing? Love Song. So this time I'm kind of cornered, and I'm at the luncheon with everybody else. And I really dug into what they were saying. And afterwards, I went and introduced myself. And I do remember that they made me feel uncomfortable enough by asking me if I was a Christian to cut it short and split. Okay. And so that's all 6 months before, 4 months before Jane came to the Lord. So go back to March of 71. There was a band that had been playing. It was a little trio, and they had been doing concerts in high schools and junior highs for a year in Houston. The group later became the group Dove, the first band signed to Murr Records. But at that time, they were just a duo, 2 guys, David Smith and Bill Andrews, Bill and Dave. But they were the ones that had been out doing all these school assemblies all over Harris County and 3 or 4 counties surrounding for a year on behalf of First Baptist Church of Houston. And those people, and there was a young evangelist associated with a guy named Richard Hogue. The thing was called Sporino, Spiritual Revolution Now. It was obviously dovetailing right on top of the Jesus movement. And in fact, I would argue that they were critical to what happened in that part of the country because Sporino went all over the country doing these meetings, and they would do a whole week of school assemblies and do concerts at night with this evangelist speaking and breaking up his sermon in pieces, but they were reaching so many kids, it was ridiculous. So that guy that was the head of that little music group, and the evangelist's wife had led Jane to the Lord at the church service on Sunday morning when she came home and said, Bobby, I'm living for Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It was the evangelist's wife, Marilyn, that led Jane to the Lord. And the head of that little trio was a guy named Bill Landers, and he showed up in my house on a Saturday afternoon and walked in with his guitar and his album under his arm that he had made. And I went, that's cool. I never knew anybody that made their own album. So he's got me kind of cornered because they cooked it up behind my back. And yeah. And so I thought it took me about 30 or 40 minutes to figure out this guy is a plant and this is an ambush. So I thought, I'm gonna really obliterate this guy, and maybe the rest of them will leave me alone. So that's kind of what I started doing, and it was really amazing because Landers was able to just he was really used to telling people about the Lord and being real open, and he just kind of went past all that and said, "Bob, I don't know your answer to the thing you just brought up, but I do know this: Jesus died for you, and if you were the only person in town that needed his salvation, he would have come for you." And I went, wow, really? So little by little, my cathodes began to melt and I quit arguing. And then I started listening. And then the Spirit of God just kind of jumped my bones. And I realized that all that time I was also a kind of a student of Jesus Christ Superstar, believe it or not. God had used that rock opera especially the crucifixion and the death scenes and the scene with Pilate. The beating and all that. I was really zeroed in on that. I didn't want anybody to know it, but I was. So the Spirit of God was drawing me and using the most outlandish stuff to do so. And, so by the time Landers finally had me down to the right place, he said, Bob, pray with me. If you want to give your life to Jesus, you want to see what he can do in your life, try this. Just try it. So that's what I did. I finally said, okay, game on. And I'll try it. And I did. And I immediately that week began to notice some things different. And one of them was I had a conscience for the first time in my life.
Wow.
Honestly, I felt like I could get away with anything and always had, and could mow over anybody and do it and get away with stuff. And yet I couldn't get away from the fact that something special had happened. And so, the people around me, Jane and her new buddies, they were all ecstatic about it. And I thought, well, cool. We'll see what happens. But a week after, I won't go into the story of how it happened, but a week after I came to the Lord, had a stumble, a big one. But I came out of it, and a friend of Jane's who knew about as much Bible, maybe a little bit more Bible than me, but Gail sat in the floor and talked to me about Belshazzar and when using the things of the Lord and the way the Lord took him that night, and it's like, wow, that scared me. And I thought, well, I don't want that to happen to me. She said, but we all fall and stumble. You can get forgiven. And so I did. And I prayed and I went down that night to the St. Thomas University down the street from where we lived in Houston. And I loved this. It was novelesque, where Martin Luther King Memorial. And it was really peaceful and sweet. It was only a half block from my house. I went down there with my guitar and wrote my first Christian song.
Wow.
So a week after I came to the Lord, he already had set my feet on what he intended. Yeah, and after that, I just say I was fast tracking because the Jesus movement, and I realized even when I was running away from Jane to Dallas, I saw the front page of the cover of Life magazine at some truck stop on the way to Dallas that day, and went, Jesus movement sweeps America. I went, yeah, it's kind of thing. But that's what was going on, guys. It was evolving every direction you could go and touching people all over the place. And there was only one other group in Houston that was doing Christian music of that variety for a year and a half, 2 years. And one of them was the one that became Farrell and Farrell, and the other one was a group called Blessed Hope, and changed their name later to Hope of Glory. And they had a Saturday night rally every Saturday night at this Christian missionary church in Pasadena. And Jane and I would go every Saturday night, obviously. And that's where I met Larry Norman. That's where I met Andre Crouch. I met all these people, and it's because these groups were starting to infiltrate and travel and go. I guess what I'm saying is that the music was so novel and people weren't used to. And all I was doing was that I cut my teeth on the Beatles and Steppenwolf and, and all that kind of music. And I just wrote what was in my gut and what was in my head and my heart. So I never really paid attention to whether it's just okay for me to do this. I just did it. But it was really funny because I talked to you about all the kids that they were reaching, like thousands and thousands of new believers in Houston because of this Spirino thing that had happened in 1970. And Jane and I kind of became, at First Baptist Church, we became the poster children of the Jesus Revolution in Houston because God rescued us and saved our marriage. And the pastor at that church, he would wheel us out and say, give your testimony right now, Bob. Go here and give your testimony. But they started having backyard follow-up Bible studies to that big move of God that happened in Houston. And so they called us one day because one of our roommates at our house was a high school friend or a grade school friend of mine, but Jane's best friend, Margot. And we started singing love song, and they had that thing, the Maranatha Ever Loving Everlasting Music Concert album out, and we knew songs from that, and we would just get together for prayer meetings at the house with other believers at our house in the living room and put on the album and pray, and we started singing songs together. And Jane and Margot and I started singing some stuff, but we got a call from the church one day and said, there's a Bible study, a bunch of new believers. Some of them were junior high school, all the way up to college. Could you come sing? And we went, I don't know. Can we? Because what do we know? And you know what we sang? One of the things we did that day, I remember, was I don't know how to love him. Remember that song from Jesus?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Jesus Christ Superstar. And so that was one of the first things we performed to an audience was something.
Oh, my goodness.
That's hilarious. But I'll tell you something really novel is that we did that little backyard Bible study, and the next week the phone started ringing, and it didn't quit ringing for years of people saying, please come do that here. So it all evolved. And what I'm telling you, I guess in essence, is that the Jesus movement wasn't about career. It wasn't about I'm a musician. It wasn't about ministry necessarily. It was about lifestyle and evangelism. It was about, take Jesus' hand in one hand and bring your friend with the other. And that was the whole ethos and essence of the Jesus movement. And that's why it went kablooey, because it was just individuals reaching out to anybody, everybody, and bringing them into what they did. And so we would go and sing at Dairy Queen's and go to TCU campus and sing, just set up on the student union steps. And we would do anything and everything, everywhere, anytime. So that was the mentality that Jane and I had. And we weren't making any money. I mean, there wasn't any such thing. And I didn't know any more about song copyright than Linda McCartney did when they started. They were stupid. I was equally as stupid about how you make money from a song you write. They didn't even occur to me for years and years until people started cutting my songs. In fact, the first song cut I got was that song. That was the first song I wrote, which was called Restored, and the Pat Terry group did it. And when they did it, I had to go, well, how do I get paid? So I had to learn it all. So that was kind of in essence a thumbnail sketch of the Jesus movement, how it hit us and how it impacted us. And it literally just it was like going in the side door of all that, because I didn't get a degree or have any intent of any kind or any career goals of any kind like that. It just happened.
So 2 things. First of all, what I hear is the power of a praying wife.
Yes.
Girls, keep praying. And the second thing I have to ask you is, it's really hot right now. Have you seen the Jesus Revolution movie? And what are your thoughts?
I did. I didn't have any more expectation for it than what is in it. It's basically Greg Laurie's story. And that's okay. It's just not the whole story. And in fact, I was telling Steve the other day when we were on the phone that I remember about so much music happening alongside it. And I felt like it could have been more exemplified in that movie, but I know that's not what the movie was intending. But Love Song, the guys in Love Song, Chuck and Tommy, have told me they really had to get confronted in a way with Chuck Smith, because he was really fighting it. He's pushing back. His daughter was in his grill. His wife was in his grill about it. And yet he just couldn't seem to just open arms, embrace it. But they finally set up either at his house or down at the Calvary Chapel and did Welcome Back. Mm. And it melted his heart. Mm. And from that point forward, he embraced it and pushed it. But I did, it was great memories. I mean, Jane and I and our grandsons and all of us went to the show and we enjoyed it. But I want somebody to do something that really covers more of what that Jesus Revolution, how far it went and how many lives it touched, and because it was very spontaneous and combustible,
Well, Bob, I think you might have just outlined your next project.
There you go.
I hope it's not a self-published book.
Hey, you were talking about how the phone started ringing and just kept ringing. And one of the things that I think is really fascinating on your resume is that you and Jane were invited to tour Poland in 1984. How did that come about, and what was that like?
Jane read something called Vanya. It was a book about a Russian soldier that got persecuted for his faith and eventually died from it in Russia in the 70s. And Jane got the book, and then she got, I want you to check this out, Bobby. So I did, and I read the account, and I thought, that's really touching. All I can tell you is the Lord in the early 80s, like 81 or 2, began to really permeate our brain and heart with the Slavic people. Mm. And we began to have a real heart for people on that side of the Iron Curtain. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the Christianity in Western Europe had become a guttering flame, but in Eastern Europe, it was outlawed. Mm-hmm. So we just thought, why don't we go over there and find a way to take them the gospel? And so we began we were in Oklahoma by then at our church, Metro Church, and they took 2 different of those evangelistic journeys were financed by love offerings from our home church, and they just paid our way. And we would go in and we're hooked up with Karen Lafferty. He had a thing called Musicians and Missions that was based in Amsterdam. And they would book, and Eddie Huff, who worked with her. I don't know if you know who Eddie is, but he's a radio personality, Christian guy in Tulsa now. But Eddie would work with her, and he would book us into military places in Western Europe, and that's how we paid for our trip. That's how we made enough money to live. So we would go play for Americans that were starved for American music, and they were living in Germany and Switzerland and you name it. And it was fun. And even though we were gospel, they would come anyway and have a great time. People would get saved. So it was wonderful. And then we would take the bulk of the trip and find a way to get into Poland or get into Romania or in Yugoslavia. And we got an invitation to come with Tom Newman. In those days, he had a thing called Toymaker's Dream that was a production, a pantomime and music thing. And he got an invitation from a guy in Russia to come and do supposed to be 15 concerts in Moscow and Leningrad. And when we got over there, the shows they weren't paying us, but the shows were so packed out that they just kept adding dates. And we ended up doing 33 shows. We played in Leningrad in that ice hockey arena that holds 100,000 people.
Yes.
And they shaped off a little thing that was like 25,000 people. We played 20 shows, packed. And I took Dave Robbins, my friend that's in Blackhawk now. Joe English was with us playing drums. And otherwise it was Farrell and Farrell. And we did some Jefferson Starship, and we did some Mr. Mister, and we did some Farrell and Farrell. We did some DeGarmo Key. We knew 45. We were kind of a put together band, but we did 45-minute opener for Toymaker. And we were playing to 25,000 people. Wow. And they were hungry. You can't even believe this is the year before the wall came down.
Right. Sounds exciting.
And in fact,
that's the big thing, right? Is the timing. I mean, younger listeners, I remember that time, and it was really no small thing that you got to be there. This was a very big deal then.
Yeah, Becky, the invitation came from the Peace Committee, which is part of the Kremlin. It's ridiculous. Here was a Christian band being sponsored for shows. We just literally got so out there, and Tom was supposed to follow suit and not say, specific things from the platform. And about 3-4 nights in, I said, Tom, you know what? These promoters, they're not paying us, and they're charging people a week's wage in rubles to come. They're not going to throw us out of the country, brother. Whatever you want to say it, because they're not going to toss you out of the country. So I was right. And Tom started getting real brazen about the stage, and so did we in between songs, because we had translators. There was a guy, I'll never forget this guy. He had a little bow tie, and we called him bow tie. In fact, his little red tuxedo tie on every night. He introduced us. And one night I was sitting there watching him from side stage, and I went, this guy's introducing us as Paul McCartney and Wings. And I thought, and everybody looked at me and went, yeah, because we would go out and it would be a thunderous applause when we walked out on the stage. So he was kind of our translator, but we did get brave. But I think it was more one of the seminal moments, because we for our ministry with Farrell and Farrell, because there we were in front of thousands of people daily for 3 weeks. And we knew we were making progress with them. It felt like for the very first time for me, in some ways, is that we were literally pulling down walls.
Wow! And
a lot of people were praying, and we were being brave as we could be, and telling the full gospel as much as we could get away with it. And it was really great. It was just a wonderful, wonderful time. And in fact, I'll tell you something that's funny, because after the return home from that tour, all that entertainment stuff that we felt like we were kind of slid into with Farrell and Farrell, it began to lose some savor for us. We just, because my thing is that things start off so God touched, God breathed, and then man gets their hands on it and screws it up. And that's kind of what happened to CCM, because people started thinking about their bus and their tours and their outfits, and then worship music skated in the late 90s, and it hasn't really subsided, but it's kind of gone there. or it's kind of corrupted now. It's not as pure as it was. I think something fresh needs to happen in Christian music. And I don't know what it is, but it just feels like it's static and will stay it to me.
Mhm.
That's my opinion. Mhm.
For
But
sure. I love how music was that gateway, though, for the gospel as you
amen.
traveled over there. And certainly I'm so grateful for the journey back during the Jesus movement because it helped pave the way for some really great music. And I just have to know, too, of the many CCM hits that you and Jane had between 1977 and 1989. Do you have a favorite? And that wasn't static, by the way. Your stuff was really incredible. So,
I mean, I love everything I write. So, no, I'm kidding. I don't know what that would be. I love the stuff that happens kind of serendipitously. Like People in a Box is a good example because nobody could have predicted anything like that. Because for a year and a half, everywhere we went in for a show and we went to sound check, we would spend the next hour doing who wins the prize today for live People in a Box videos. So youth groups would come together and compete at our sound check
Mm.
and do their little version of the People in a Box live video. So, and nobody dreamed that up. It just started happening on its own. But that was kind of a phenomenon. I don't know, Becky. I don't think I'm no good at trying to drill down on what my favorites were because, I wrote all the songs except two or three over that period of time for Farrell and Farrell. And at the same time, I was writing for Sandy Patty and
mhm.
any number of other people. But
I'll tell you my favorite. People All Over the World is my favorite.
yeah, that's a lot of people's favorite, and I'm real partial to that. Michael Demas, who played guitar, his wife Nancy, until she passed away, she was our bass player in our band. And Michael and I wrote a lot of the tech stuff together, and he wrote the chorus to People All Over the World. And came over one day in the '80s and played it for me, and I went, "Wow."
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And I wrote a lyric before there was any verse music. In fact, because I just loved the song, and so did a lot of people. There was a lot of high moments. All You Need was a big thing because it broke out on pop radio on its own, and
Mm.
it broke out in such a way that it melted down our record label in a way because they didn't know what to do with it. They had
Yeah.
no clue how to contain it or make hay out of it, and so All You Need hit the waves in what 78, and it did really really well. Boundless Love probably is a lot of people's fave because it's I don't know that it's ever even been recut, but it was the song Jane down at the publishing house heard it through the wall one day while we were cutting the Portrait album with Brown Bannister, and she heard it through the wall. Just went over and knocked on the door, went in and said, "I want that song." And
Mm.
which
Writers
is
hate
very like,
that.
yeah, very like Jane. And brought it out to the studio, and Brown and I just went, "God, we have to cut this, don't we? This is unbelievably good." It was Danny Lohan who wrote that song. So there were two or three times when I was smart enough to know cut this song. So I was always open to collaborating. I just found that I could do whatever I needed to do in the situation. If it was play some changes on the guitar or write a lyric or come up with the melodies. I just always was shifting gears that way over my whole writing career. So I ended up writing with Mark Gershwin and Brian Bannister and a lot of people over the years, just because, and Steve Seiler and Reggie Ham and Dan Muckala and people, during that era. As you will probably agree, Steve, that collaborating is really, really healthy.
Mm.
Or
Absolutely. It's life-giving, I think, because you've got people coming into the room ready to put their heart into something, ready to be open and give their best. And there's listening and there's sharing of ideas and there's an alchemy that happens. There's something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And the best part of it, now I'm going to make a joke, but the best part of it is you get to take credit for other people's great stuff.
here's a good example. I wrote a song called "There Is a Savior," And if I could just get up in front of any crowd, really anywhere, and just start singing, people are going to know it and go, "Oh man, we do it at my church all the time." And I wrote that in 1981. I didn't know Greg Nelson, but I wrote it because somebody had hooked us up, and at Lorenz Publishing there on the row, and I went in, and Greg sat down at the piano, and he's one of those guys that can just write music that sounds like an old hymn. He's got a gift that's real rare in that sense. And he had this music started, and I just said, "How about There's a Savior?" And just started singing a chorus over the top of his playing. And then and it started a pattern that I took that music home on a little cassette work tape and wrote the lyric and brought it back. And that started, but you know that Greg and I didn't write again for 10 years because of my schedule, mainly.
Sure.
Always on the road somewhere. But
Well,
after I got off the road with Farrell and Farrell, I called him up and I said, "You know what, man? That There's a Savior's in 12 hymnals now. Maybe we should write some more together." And so we did. We got together, and it was a very fruitful 10 years because we wrote Le Voyage, we wrote Savior, we wrote Emmanuel, and we wrote scads of songs for Sandy and Steve Green and Larnell and all these other people that Greg produced. So we had a ton of songs. It was a field day for a writer because I would just find out what he's doing. So I just kind of, for a long time there, I was just hooked right up to Greg. It was so fruitful, but it was also real predictable how we get together, and we would take off on stuff that if it had just been me, it would never come out of my head. It's hard to say what's my favorite out of our catalog together because we wrote so many different things, but I think it'd have to be Savior, which is going to be at Carnegie Hall for the third time later this year. So it's already, and each time we get to go sit up in the gallery like the two Muppet guys. The ones
So that is a song. There is a song that you wrote that I've sung several years, and it's Cross of Love. It's a fun song to sing, I have to say, as a vocalist. I enjoy singing that one.
Have you done Savior before?
We actually, in a church that I was a part of, we wrote our own dramas, but we pulled a majority of those songs. So on that project, we used a lot of those songs.
You know what? I remember in the process that Norman Miller, who was a manager for Point of Grace and a lot of acts, he's gone now. Norman, great guy. He did The Young Messiah and was very successful with that. And he was looking for a new one to do, and he thought he could do it. When he heard the music to Savior. Savior was only the back half when we first wrote it, because Greg called me one day and said, "You want to write a cantata with me?" Because he had a word publishing print thing he needed to fulfill. I said, "Yeah, what's a cantata?" And he said, "Well, it's kind of a short oratorio." Okay, cool. What's an oratorio? And kind of went, that's the way it always went with us, because he had all the nomenclature that I didn't have and all the knowledge I didn't have. But honestly, we wrote the back half. So the one that started with "So long they had waited as a nation," and it went from there to the end. "So shall we live," and it was 30 minutes long. And we played for Norman Miller, and he went crazy. "This is huge. I'll help you get a record deal," which he did with Warner Alliance. But he said, I want to tour it. I need for it to be 60 minutes long. He said, "Can you guys go writing more?" So we went back to the drawing board, and I said, "Well, all that stuff is New Testament. Let's just back up and do Old Testament and talk it on." So we did, and we started with Creation, the Creation Overture, and I can't even tell you, because I wrote that lyric, for the line sure of it, and I came up with titles. When I went hop skipping through the Old Testament, I cannot tell you why I picked what I picked, but it was anointed. It was God breathed, and my wife would come in at night when I was working at home and on it, and she would read the next morning what I'd read the night before, and she was how women do, and she'd just say, "Bobby, you need to stay on this thing. Don't let go of this one. This is a gem."
Oh, it
Some of
is.
it was real tough writing, Steve-O. You could relate to songs like "Promised Land" that are just all information.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Jews moving through the desert. It's like, oh, what? I mean, I struggled with that because I had to make it entertaining and I had to make it high art if I could. And it was just like data to me.
Right.
But it was well done. And it has worked so well for several years as we've done those Easter musicals. It just, it paints the picture, it sets it all up.
30 years old next year. So that's a 30th
Oh my goodness.
anniversary thing at Carnegie. But here it was the reason I was going headed with that was that Ron Huff, Dan Huff's daddy, Dan does all that, Carrie Underwood and Keith Urban, all that production. Great guitar player. His dad, Ron, was the National Symphony conductor a dozen years. But I'd known Ron since we were at the same record label when I got signed as Farrell and Farrell. It was a Gaither-owned label, and so I met all kinds of people immediately. The first year, and one of them was Huff, and got to be really close with him. He and Greg and I were close, and when he heard the work tapes of Savior, he was studying psychology or something at Vanderbilt. He quit that semester. He just stopped school and went to work on Savior nonstop.
Huh.
So he wrote for 6 months, and then we went to the studio and did work with David Hamilton on track. And we took that track to London, CTS, and overdubbed the London Symphony Orchestra. Overdubbed the orchestra to a click. And Huff was out there conducting, and we almost had a train wreck because he hated the click. Conductors conducting to a click is not a lot of fun, and he didn't love it. But he settled down because at first we thought we got 75 people on the floor. What are we going to do if this guy gets out and says I can't do this? So he settled down and we got into a groove. But once we got into a couple of songs in on cutting with the orchestra, Greg and I just turned to each other and just went, "How did we do this? I mean, we couldn't have in a million years done what Ron has done." So it was very much, I'll tell you this, having written Hero the Rock Opera, Emmanuel, Le Voyage, Emmanuel, Savior, those extended works that are longer than a song long, when you couple all this stuff together and do a rock opera or an oratory or a suite or whatever it is, you don't get the results that's magic. That's God breathed and anointed. You don't get there unless you're willing to back off. You got to know when to shut up and go with the flow. Because I've seen people mess up projects by being too clingy and too hands-on. I mean, there's a point at which you just have to let it go.
Yeah, there's a flow that's happening, and if you try to take control of it, you could kill it.
You're ruining it. But if you're willing to bring that stuff to town, well, this, Steve, because you go every time you go to the studio with Mark Baldwin or somebody, it comes home on the waves to you. Right? You go, wow, is that guy good? And am I glad I didn't sit in here and tell him how to play every lick?
Exactly.
And because I've seen people really stub their face on that, and it's hard. But when we were doing Hero, the rock opera, Eddie and I would stay out of the studio and say, when Michael Tate comes in to do his work, I don't need to be there. Right. I need for Michael to own this because he's going to be out on the road doing it.
When you work with that kind of talent, that's how you wind up having pieces that have a lifespan of 20 or 30 years and minister long, long, long after they're written. So
yeah, and bro, I learned that early on. I learned it on the first Farrell and Farrell date in the studio with Shane Keister and all those session players that produced hits on a constant basis in 3-hour segments every day of their life. And I figured out, boy, you know what you got to do? Just write strong melody, good changes, and a great lyric, and bring it in here and run it down for these guys, and let them take a number chart, and they get out of their way.
I'd like to talk for a minute about our staff time together because there's one really fun story that comes to mind. I had a friend who I'd known for many, many years back in California who was visiting, young lady, and we were staff mates at McSpadden Smith at the time. And I was in one of the writers' rooms with her, and she started talking about Farrell and Farrell. And she started talking about you guys like you were the Beatles or something, right? And I'm thinking, that's just Bob, this is my buddy Bob, right?
Come on.
Anyway, she's going on and on about this. And I happen to know that you're in the next room. And so I said, hey, just give me a minute. And I came out and I said, hey, Bob, come on here. Come over here to this next room. I want you to meet somebody. And you just walked in and stuck your hand out. And I thought she was going to faint dead away.
Was it Mandy?
Yeah. Yeah. Mandy Pinto. And you wound up writing a couple of songs with her and I. And so talk about a dream come true for her. That was really, really fun. Not often you get that you're able to make somebody's dream come true that quickly.
Yeah.
I can make this happen right now.
Take advantage of it when you can do it, man.
Oh, gosh. Well, Bob, I know that the people who've been hearing, the artists that you've worked with and written for over the years are very impressed, but they don't know that the most impressive thing that ever happened for you was that you were the only co-writer on the Celebration Table solo CD I did for Music for the Soul. So you want to talk about an honor? That's an honor. So the song was called These Things, and I want to play a little bit of that right now.
Whatever things are lovely, think on these things. Whatever things are of a good report. Whatever things are pleasing, the best and not the worst. Whatever things are lovely, think on these things.
Yeah, the only thing better than that song is the vocalist, I think.
Oh, wow.
Actually, the thing that makes that recording work is the piano. Jason Webb. As long as we're throwing roses at people, Jason Webb is magic on the keyboards, and I will come in and play him a little work tape and me pounding it out, and he doesn't even need a chart. He just listens to the work tape a couple times, goes in and sits down and spends a few minutes working out how he wants to play it, and then
I'm in awe of those people.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Do that.
Yes,
because it is a gift. I learned in junior high or in high school putting together my own band. All my bands were basically me just hiring people, and I learned just so long ago to get the most talented people in the room you could.
that's right.
Surrounding you, and you'd have a way better chance to get this thing flying. So, I follow what you do with Music for the Soul. I just commend you because it's heavy lifting. I mean, in this marketplace and in this time that we live in, but it's really needed.
Thank
I
you.
think the work you're doing is wonderful.
Well, thanks so much for being with us today, Bob. It's been a joy to hear your stories and just where you've been and how God's used your music over the years, not just in my life, but in the lives of so many. And we're just grateful for you and what you have brought into our world musically and otherwise. If you enjoyed the discussion today, please share it with a friend and give us a positive review on iTunes.
And please visit our website, musicforthesoul.org, where you can stream or download every song in our catalog, including These Things. Read our lyrics, our healing music guide, our blog posts, and much more. Thank you for listening. God bless.